Here comes the family beggar. Aunt Patricia announced the moment I walked through my grandmother's front door, her voice carrying across the Easter gathering like a proclamation. Hide your wallets, everyone, Serena's arrived. My cousin Brandon laughed loudest, nearly spilling his mimosa, while the rest of the family chuckled with varying degrees of discomfort. But why was my phone suddenly vibrating with an urgent message from my accountant that read, "Your nephew Brandon's quarterly loan payment is 47 days overdue. Balance, $340,000. Do you want me to initiate default proceedings?" I silenced my phone and smiled. "Happy Easter, Aunt Patricia. Lovely to see you too." She air-kissed somewhere near my cheek, her expensive perfume overwhelming. "Still wearing that same old dress?" "Honey, there's no shame in thrift stores, but you could at least try." I didn't bother explaining that my old dress was a vintage Chanel I'd purchased at auction for $8,000. To Aunt Patricia, expensive only counted if it had visible logos and recognizable flash. But that was fine. In approximately 15 minutes, she was going to learn a very expensive lesson about assumptions. I became the family beggar 12 years ago when I was 17. My father, Aunt Patricia's brother, died in a construction accident when I was 16. He'd been the family success story, the one who'd started his own contracting business and pulled himself up from nothing. When he died, everything fell apart. Mom couldn't handle the grief. She disappeared into depression, then alcohol, then a series of bad relationships that took her further and further away from being a functional parent. By 17, I was essentially on my own. I asked Aunt Patricia for help exactly once. I needed $2,000 for my first semester of community college. I'd worked 2 jobs all summer, but it wasn't enough. I went to her house, the big one in the nice neighborhood that her husband's dental practice had paid for, and explained my situation. "Your father left you nothing?" she'd asked, her tone making it clear this was a moral failing rather than a tragedy. "He had debts, medical bills from before. The business was struggling." "Well," she'd sighed dramatically, "I suppose I can help, but I want you to understand this is a loan, not a gift. Family shouldn't become dependent on handouts." She'd written me a check for $500, a quarter of what I'd asked for, and told everyone at the next family gathering that she'd rescued me from dropping out entirely. From that day forward, I was the family charity case. The poor relation. The cautionary tale Aunt Patricia used to motivate her own children. "Study hard," she'd tell Brandon, "or you'll end up begging like your cousin Serena." Brandon had absorbed the lesson well. He grew up believing he was better than me by birth. That success was his birthright while I was destined for scraps. Neither of them had any idea what I'd actually become. The truth was almost embarrassingly simple. I'd gotten rich by being invisible. After community college, I'd transferred to a state school on a full scholarship. Studied finance. Graduated top of my class. Got recruited by a boutique investment firm that specialized in distressed assets. Turns out, being the family beggar had given me valuable skills. I understood desperation. I recognized opportunity in things other people had written off. I knew how to survive on nothing while planning for everything. By 28, I'd made partner. By 32, I'd started my own firm. By 35, I was managing $780 million in assets and had a personal net worth of around $45 million. I kept it quiet, not because I was ashamed, but because I'd learned that wealth changed how people saw you, and I preferred to see people clearly first. I drove a modest Honda. I lived in a nice but unremarkable apartment. I wore clothes that looked expensive to trained eyes, but not to people who judged worth by logos. At family gatherings, I said I worked in finance, which everyone interpreted as low-level bank teller, because that fit their expectations. And I watched. I listened. I learned exactly who my family really was. Brandon's business came to my attention 3 years ago. He'd started a chain of boutique fitness studios, the kind of trendy, overpriced workout spaces that charged $40 per class and served cucumber water. Aunt Patricia had bragged about it constantly. Her son, the entrepreneur. Her son, the success story. What she didn't mention was that Brandon had no idea how to run a business. He'd burned through his initial investment in 8 months. He'd taken out a second mortgage on his condo. He'd maxed out credit cards, borrowed from friends, and was 3 weeks away from bankruptcy when he applied for a loan from Pacific Capital Partners. My firm. He didn't know I owned it. The application came through normal channels, flagged for additional review because of his poor credit history. When I saw his name, I should have recused myself. Instead, I approved the loan personally. $400,000 at 8% interest, secured against his business assets. Enough to save his studios from collapse. Enough to give him a second chance he hadn't earned, but I was willing to provide. I told myself it was a sound investment. His business model was actually decent. He just needed competent financial management. With proper oversight, the studios could be profitable. But if I'm being honest, part of me wanted to see what he'd do. Whether the boy who'd laughed at the family beggar would ever develop into someone worth respecting. 3 years later, I had my answer. The Easter gathering was in full swing when my accountant's second message arrived. Confirmed, payment 47 days overdue. Third missed deadline this year. Per loan terms, you have grounds for immediate default and asset seizure. Please advise. Brandon was holding court in Grandma's living room, describing his empire to impressed relatives. 5 studios now, expanding to 7. Revenue doubling year over year. Plans for franchising. He didn't mention that his revenue growth was almost entirely funded by my money, or that his expansion had put him even deeper in debt, or that he'd missed 3 consecutive quarterly payments while buying himself a BMW and a Rolex. Aunt Patricia beamed beside him, basking in reflected glory. Brandon's been such an inspiration, she announced. Building something from nothing, just like his grandfather. Meanwhile, some people just can't seem to get on their feet, no matter how much help they receive. She glanced at me pointedly. I felt something cold settle in my chest. Not anger. I'd burned through my anger years ago. Just clarity. Crystal clear certainty about what needed to happen next. I excused myself to the backyard and called my accountant. Margaret, I need you to do something for me. Name it. Brandon's loan. I want you to call him directly. Right now. Use the formal default language. Don't mention my name. Just say Pacific Capital Partners is initiating proceedings. Are you sure? It's Easter Sunday. I'm sure. And Margaret? Put it on speaker if you can. I want to hear his voice. I was refilling my water glass in the kitchen when Brandon's phone rang. He answered casually, expecting nothing. Brandon Mitchell speaking. I couldn't hear Margaret's words, but I watched his face transform. Confusion first, then concern, then pure, undiluted terror. What do you mean default proceedings? I'm barely late. Pause. 47 days? That can't be right. I thought I sent. Longer pause. Asset seizure? You can't just, I have 5 locations. I have employees. Aunt Patricia had noticed something was wrong. She crossed the room toward her son, her face pinched with concern. Brandon? What is it? He waved her off frantically. Listen, there has to be some mistake. Who's the principal at Pacific Capital? I need to speak to whoever's in charge. I can explain. Another pause. Brandon's face went gray. They won't take a call? What do you mean they won't? This is my entire business. You can't just. He lowered the phone, staring at it like it had bitten him. Mom, he said, his voice cracking. I'm in trouble. Big trouble. What kind of trouble? There's a loan. A big one. I missed some payments, and now they're saying they can take everything. A loan? From whom? Why didn't you come to me? Because you didn't have $400,000 lying around. The number hit the room like a bomb. Aunt Patricia actually staggered backward. 400, Brandon, how could you? I was growing the business. I needed capital. They offered great terms, and I thought I could handle the payments, but things got tight, and I figured they wouldn't notice. How much do you owe now? With penalties? He checked his phone. $340,000. Due in 30 days or they seize everything. Aunt Patricia's face cycled through emotions, shock, fear, and finally desperation. She turned to scan the room, mentally cataloging family members who might help. Her eyes landed on me. For one surreal moment, I saw her consider it. Asking the family beggar for $340,000. The absurdity of it flickered across her face before she dismissed it. We'll figure something out, she told Brandon. We'll talk to the bank. Get a second mortgage. Something. Your house is already mortgaged, I said quietly. Second and third. I would know. Everyone turned to look at me. How would you know that? Aunt Patricia demanded. I pulled out my phone and dialed Margaret back. Please send the loan documents to my personal email. Full file, including the original approval. Right away, Ms. Mitchell. Ms. Mitchell. My father's name. Brandon's name too, technically. We were cousins through our fathers, both Mitchells. The silence in the room was absolute. I work in finance, I said, setting my phone on the counter. I believe I mentioned that. What I may not have mentioned is that I own Pacific Capital Partners. I have for 7 years. Brandon's face went from gray to white. Your loan came across my desk 3 years ago, Brandon. Bad credit, poor business plan, no collateral worth mentioning. Any sane investor would have rejected it immediately. Then why? Because you're family. Because I thought maybe, if someone gave you a real chance, you'd grow into someone worth believing in. I shook my head slowly. I was wrong. Aunt Patricia stepped forward. Now wait just a minute. If you've had money all this time. Yes. Why didn't you say anything? Why did you let us think? Let you think what? That I was a beggar? A charity case? That I needed your help and your pity? I laughed softly. I let you think what you wanted to think. I dressed simply, drove modestly, and never mentioned my success because I wanted to see who my family really was. And I saw. Every Easter, every Christmas, every gathering where you announced my arrival like a warning. I looked at Brandon. I gave you $400,000 because I believe in second chances. I believed in you. And you spent the last 3 years buying luxury cars, designer watches, and taking vacations while missing payments on the loan that saved your business. I was going to catch up. When? With what? Your revenue is good, Brandon, but your expenses are absurd. You take a $200,000 salary from a company that barely breaks even. You expense personal dinners, vacations, your car payment. You've been treating my investment like a personal ATM. I didn't know it was your money. Does that matter? Would you have been more responsible if you'd known it was mine? Or would you have just laughed about it, the way you laughed about me being a beggar? He had no answer. I turned to Aunt Patricia. You called me the family beggar. You've called me that for 12 years, since I was a teenager grieving my father and asking for help with college. You gave me $500 and acted like a saint. You've dined on that story ever since. I was trying to help. You were trying to feel superior. There's a difference. I picked up my bag. I'm calling in the loan. Brandon has 30 days to pay $340,000, or Pacific Capital seizes his business assets. You can't. Aunt Patricia grabbed my arm. He's family. You destroy your own cousin over money? I funded my own cousin for 3 years while he mocked me at every family gathering. I think I've been generous enough. I pulled my arm free and walked toward the door. Serena, wait. Brandon's voice was desperate. I'll do whatever you want. Set up a payment plan, take a reduced salary, anything. Just don't take my business. It's all I have. I stopped at the door and looked back at him. This man who'd laughed loudest when his mother called me a beggar. Send me a restructuring proposal by Friday. Real numbers. A realistic salary. A plan to actually pay back what you owe. I paused. And Brandon, the next time you see someone struggling, remember what it felt like to need help from someone you'd spent years looking down on. I walked out into the spring sunshine. My phone buzzed. Margaret. Proceedings paused per your instruction. Happy Easter, boss. I smiled and got in my modest Honda. Some lessons cost $500. Others cost $340,000. But the most expensive lessons are the ones that force you to see yourself clearly. I hoped Brandon was finally ready to learn. Asterisk, they called me a beggar because I once needed help. They laughed because laughing at the less fortunate made them feel rich. But real wealth isn't what you have. It's what you build, and who you become, and whether you remember where you came from when you finally arrive somewhere new. I remembered. And now they'll never forget. Asterisk.